What if you could experience the next years of positive results in just 67 days? On today's episode, Dr. Shannon Irvine is going to take you from goal setter to effective goal getter. Dr. Shannon Irvine is a neuropsychologist, and she is obsessed with helping entrepreneurs crack the code on success. And in today's episode, we go deep, and you are in for a treat.
Rainmakers, I am so excited to have today's guest on. She's a strategist, a mentor. She has a neuropsychology PhD, which is absolutely incredible. She's obsessed with helping entrepreneurs learn how to train their brain to create the business and life that exceeds their wildest expectations. So I am so excited to have you on, Shannon. Welcome to today's show.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here because I love what you do and I love who you help. I'm a mama, like I am your people. So thank you for having me on. I'm super stoked to be able to be here today.
Yeah, and just any listeners listening, I mean, some of you may know Dr. Shannon Irvine from our group. We brought her in as a trainer a
Mhm.
handful of times. And I feel like anytime we bring you in, Shannon, it's like a slingshot. Like people just kind of get in there and they launch. And it's really cool. Like I've seen total like trajectory changes from people like before talking to you and then after talking to you. And so we're believing this episode for you listening to the show, it could just be that as well. So Shannon, one thing that I thought would just be an interesting place to start with you. We can go into your journey a little bit, but before we do, something we've been really noticing a lot lately is people's and ourselves language patterns. And we did a training in our group recently about just looking at just the slight little nuances of how you say certain things. You know, how do you talk about your business? How do you talk about something that's happening in your life, whether it's a problem or a possibility, or how do you frame it? Have you done any digging? I'm sure you have on this topic of like the power of like kind of those unconscious words almost like
Mhm.
the things that just come out naturally. What do you see in people that you're working with?
Yeah, no, such a good question because the language that you use, it's just a reflection of the patterns that are in your subconscious. Like you can't help but speak English because you're here in the United States or wherever you're listening from if you speak English because that's the native language in that area. It's the same thing with your brain. Your brain can only speak the language of the patterns that are in your subconscious. So I always tell everybody, like, understand that that's actually really good news because now you're hearing a pattern that does not serve you and in fact stops you. So observe your brain when you're saying things like, I have to do this, or this is hard, or I'm not sure, or I'm overwhelmed, or I don't know. That's one of the biggest ones. Like, I don't know. That stops more multi seven figure entrepreneurs from becoming that. Is this pattern that produces a language that will keep you safe. I think for your listeners to understand that the way our brain is designed and wired, we actually have to give it the information that we want it to produce an outcome with. And most people never do that. So what we do is we go on autopilot and then the patterns of the past, whether it's our family of origin, environment of origin, don't worry, we don't need to deep dive back there. They had patterns about money, about worth, about success, about confidence. And, one of the things I'll hear a lot is like entrepreneurs that are getting started and their families are like, you know what, this is a little bit too big. Like, don't play, be safe. Like, don't get rid of your 9 to 5, like those kind of things. So these patterns of the past are running 90, sorry to tell you, 90% of your daily decisions, which create your actions, which create your results. And the clue to that is the language patterns that you have. So anytime you move toward the goal or toward the thing you're trying to create, and you find yourself saying, this is hard or I'm tired. So interesting what our brain serves us. Get this, you guys, to keep you safe. And when I say safe, right now, unless you've trained your brain in this way, it means like a pulse and alive. Like, I'm pretty sure that's not on any of your listeners' vision boards. Like, I just want to have a pulse and I want to be present and not eaten by tigers. But that's what your brain is trying to do, is trying to align with the safety that's already been a part of your patterns. And so it's such a great thing to just, even in the moment, Now, this it's a little deeper than just shifting language, but it's a clue. And I love using language patterns as a clue to say, okay, well, I don't want to be confused. So what is that like creating for me that I get to stop? Like I'm trying to do this business, I'm trying to grow, I'm trying to create financial freedom, but yet I'm telling myself I'm overwhelmed. Am I? Or am I just experiencing something new? And so therefore my brain is saying like abort, 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 you know? Well, yeah, language patterns are great clues to the patterns that are literally running 90% of your daily decisions, actions, and therefore the results, unless you flip that switch on and start to take control of it. Yeah.
And I've seen firsthand the power of this in my own life, like paying attention to the patterns and what I'm speaking out loud and what I'm declaring over myself. And I've heard this all the time, but really putting into practice, I would say even more so like recently, and how it's changing the game for things, and how oh no, I actually am believing that I can show up powerfully and this is who I'm created to be. So I love that you talk about this. I would love to know like what your thoughts are, because I see this in our community a lot. And I think moms feel that way, women feel this way, is they come a point in their business where they say like, I'm feeling discouraged or I just need to vent. I think there are moments where you do feel discouraged because it's new, like you just mentioned. But like, what would you tell that person who's like, just did a post on Facebook starting out with, I'm feeling discouraged?
I'm stuck. I'm feeling discouraged. Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, great that you're acknowledging that. Great that you're like, I'm in a place I don't want to be. Like, that's a great leaping point. Now, if you continue to enroll yourself in the following languages, and that's why I'm stopping, that's not good. But if we're saying I'm stuck, I'm discouraged, I'm overwhelmed, then it's a clue. And I always like to give a visual for this. It's like, here's the destination you're heading toward. Like, this is the 6-figure business, the 7-figure business. This is financial freedom. This is, I can spend my time with my kids whenever I want to and build my business whenever I want to. And it's my choice. So that's where a lot of your listeners and a lot of my people are headed, right? They want it. They've dreamed about it. They've planned it. January they plan it, and then stuff gets in the way, and we could talk about that too. But here's the goal, the vision, the thing that they have not accomplished yet, right? And here's kind of the patterns that we were just talking about, right? And somewhere along the line, the world sold entrepreneurs this idea that if it's like really where you're supposed to be, and I'm going to use like really a goofy language pattern, but it should feel good. It should feel amazing. You should never hit any speed bumps and it should feel incredible. I'm telling you, that is so opposite of how your brain allows like anything to be accomplished. It's like literally the opposite. So if like, here's where you want to go and here's where you are now, like this is, based on patterns of the past, this is your results at the moment. So if you can imagine like a rubber band stretched between those, like if I let that go, it's going to go flying. Why? Because there's so much tension. Right? There's tension in your brain between where you are, which is just a reflection of the past, and where you're going, which is a reflection of what you want to create the future to be. And so we've bought into it's got to feel good, comfortable. Everything should be like, right? You guys bought into that, right? Like I start my business and it does this. Like,
Yeah.
like, let's get some truth in advertising here because that ain't real. And so what happens is, so you've got this tension going in your brain, and what your brain is working on, because you're not training it to allow success, is it's working to bring your goal back down, literally. And so overwhelm, discouragement, those pieces, they're actually neurochemicals that your brain are serving you to actually make you play smaller so that again, that it aligns with where you were. And I know that's not what your listeners want. So if that's not what you want, you really have that vision for the future, then understanding resistance is part of that. Like this is resistance, right? If I let go of that rubber band, it's going to hit somebody in the eyeball, right? There's the tension. So understanding like in the move toward becoming that next version of yourself, because the thinking that got you where you are here, this is not mine. This is Albert Einstein or somebody like that. The thinking that got you here is not the thinking that's going to take you to 6 figures. And the 6-figure thinking isn't going to take you to 7. There's a shift that has to happen in your brain. So knowing that like tension, uncomfortableness, resistance is the word we like to use in our community, is a part of the growth pattern. And it's actually almost the like green flag that says keep going because you're actually telling your brain, no, 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 this is safe and familiar. This is where we're going. I'm not going to become just a pattern of the past. We're creating the future. And so knowing that there's resistance and recognize when your brain is serving you up the thought of being the number one what I hear is overwhelmed, which was then usually followed by I'm tired, especially us mamas. And then it's like, it shouldn't be this hard, right? There's this kind of pattern and it's just bringing you back down. And you notice when you think that thought, immediately you feel better. That's ironic, isn't it, Chelsea? Because it's like, I just said I am discouraged. And by that event, I actually feel better. Yeah, because you just literally took and collapsed your brain. You said, it's okay. We can come back down to playing small in a way. So going after those things, it's a matter of, we have a thing in our community called DIA, decide in advance. So like, just like if you have kids, this is great because of all the mamas in here in the room and the dads, right? So you didn't just like have the baby and go, okay, you're good. Like, just figure it out. Like, no, you like trained every little moment. This is how you eat. This is how you do this. So it's the same thing. We've got to decide in advance if you're really committed to going to this place, if you really want to create a legacy move, if you want to shift generational patterns for yourself, for your family, for what's possible, then it's making some decisions like, okay, when I get overwhelmed, not if, when I get discouraged, what am I going to do with that? Like deciding it in advance keeps the control and the power in your prefrontal cortex or your thinking mind to make the decision to keep going. But if we wait for the feelings to actually inform that, it will take us out of the game. And it does it countless times, which breaks my heart for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Shannon, I saw a word on your site, neuro-achievement. I want to dig into this because it kind of caught my attention. I've heard of neuroplasticity, right? Where it's like the default way you're thinking. So what is neuro-achievement and why is that important for entrepreneurs?
Super important because in order to achieve anything, literally we have to flip the success switch on in our brain. Like on autopilot, it's off and just staying alive and safe. Like think not eaten by the tigers, alive, right? And so the idea of neuroachievement is looking at the systems that you have at your disposal. It's like you have a Ferrari sitting with the keys in your hand, but nobody's given you the operation manual to like where to put the key and how to go. But once you know that your brain is so systematic, so I hate to say it, rudimentary, so step by step. And who doesn't love a step by step? I think that's why I ended up going. I'm like, I need the steps to think like this person, right? So my brain went to how does her brain do that? But knowing that you can achieve when you have created a pathway to teach your brain to allow it. And what I mean by that is in order to accomplish anything, you have to build belief in your brain, right? You have to build a belief, enough of a belief that it can take over and work. And what will happen is we just try hard. We bought into this like work hard plus hustle plus hours equals success. And that literally works in opposition to how your brain allows a result. Your brain allows a result. And I always say it like this, a little bit of a tongue tie, but your brain needs to believe it in order for you to achieve it. But here's the greatest part of all. Your brain doesn't actually need to see it like in real time in order for you to believe it. And there's some of the coolest research I've had a chance to be a part of that really sparked this because I'm like, if it works in the science realm, it's got to work for us. And that's why I kind of reverse hacked this thing. But we worked with pianists not pianists, like regular people that had never played a piano, brought them into our lab. And we did what in my world we call brain priming. They didn't call it that, but we had them see the keys, but we did it in such a deep way in their minds that they practice the scales and they had never played before. So we took a scan of their brain, their no learned knowledge of the scales, went through this process of repetition. So I'm telling you, like your brain is it wants to do what you want it to do, but you've got to give it the input. So as they repeated this in their minds with guidance, with a lot of depth and emotion and 67 repetitions, this is the pattern that we know that works in the mind now. We tested them afterwards, full learned knowledge of the scales. And we're like, well, some people can learn, have visual learning, like can capture it, but surely they can't get to the piano and play the scales more accurately. And sure enough, I think it was like 92% of them got on the piano, never had touched it, and played perfect scales better even than the test group who knew the scales to begin with. I mean, I could tell you like story after story. So this is like, oh my gosh, like this system is waiting for us to train it. But most 97%, that's why the 3% are the 3%, right? 97% are on autopilot, kind of going by feelings and hoping it all works out and believe in the lie of work hard plus hustle plus hours equals success. And, if it did, every single one of your listeners would be wildly successful at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I
And
love that. Like you're telling people that they need to envision their success too. And you said something, Dr. Shannon, that like I wanted to dive into more. You said 67, I believe, right? Why is that the magic number?
So many cool things about that. So we used to believe 21 days for a habit, right? That was something that was big. And so what we know now in our world is that at 21 days, a new pathway that you're building and the old pathway are equal. So I just want you to picture it like this. Right now, and not everybody is from places like LA, but I just want you to picture like the busiest city you've ever been to with like crazy massive freeways, right? So right now you've got freeways running to your stories about money, about worth, about your capacity, your potential, all those things. And they're not even your stories. They're not even your patterns. They're the patterns of someone else. Because when you're growing up, the part of your brain that could say, I don't think that's true, that's the prefrontal cortex. It doesn't fully develop until you're 21 for women, 24 for men. I don't understand that. That's a God question. But anyway, so when you're young and somebody else's patterns are in repetition around you, they become your patterns. It's inherited. I mean, there's a small percentage of people that have like an infiltration kind of thing where a big event creates a pattern. But for the most part, it's just patterns of the past. They were repeated enough around you, and you didn't have the part of your brain that can say, I don't believe that yet. And so they become your patterns. And so here these freeways they're just, I want you to picture like no on ramp or no off ramp. It's just going, right? It's firing without your knowledge, it's firing without your permission, and it's running 90% of your decisions and therefore your action results. Now, I want you to imagine flipping that switch and then making the decision, okay, that works for me. Like maybe it's your money story is fine or your confidence is fine, or there are patterns that are working for you. So we keep them, right? We don't need to get rid of everything. We just say, okay, those work. But this pattern around money, not so good. Like a lot of people have some baggage around what money is and what money isn't. And oh my gosh, money is the root of all evil. And I'm going to become a bad person if I want to make more. My family's was I could get my business to $199. I'm not kidding you. But if I had another sale, I would do something to sabotage it. And I couldn't, like, it was literally a glass ceiling. This is what got me heading toward getting an understanding how the brain wires and fires success. And then I had a moment where I was driving around a neighborhood of a house that I want to get when my business got to 7 figures. This was 15 years ago. And that was fine. No triggers there. But I actually made an appointment with a realtor and walked into the house. And that's when I heard it on the backs of good people that make $200,000 a year. So I'm a person that values people. I want to be a good person. I want to serve other people. So my brain was literally throwing procrastination, perfection, everything chemically it could at me, because once I crossed 200K, that meant I became a bad person. these are a story of the past. I didn't choose that story. That story was just enough reps that I heard it so often. And so as you're thinking about flipping that success switch on, it's about showing your brain what you want it to see in such a specific way that your brain starts to believe it. Now at 67 days, what happens? I would say 21 days, those networks, new and old, are the same. This is why anybody who has experienced going on a diet for 21 days feel like you got it. And then the next thing you know, you're shoving cheeseburgers down your face. Or I'm on a workout plan and I'm solid for 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden I just give it up. Why? Because the old pattern is deeper. So at 21 days, they're equal. But if you don't apply pressure to it, the old one will win. But there's something that I like to call your brain's compound interest. If you keep the reps going toward where you want to go versus where you've been, then that new freeway becomes what runs the show. And now 90% of your decisions, therefore actions and results, are coming from what you have chosen to train in your brain versus what was on autopilot before. And the great news is that the old pathway, the one that wasn't even yours, that you didn't choose, that was just repeated around you, in that process, it gets jackhammered up and actually disappears. And so we think, like, what is this wonderful thing that those special 3% have that we don't have? You have everything except for knowing how your operating system can create it for you. And so that's really the 67 days is when we know the new pathway is completely running the show and the old one is completely gone. And it's pretty powerful. Yeah.
Is there anything powerful with like 30 days? Like, I know you're obviously further along than 21 days, but is there any marker at the 30-day mark, just out of curiosity?
I love that's such a great question. Like, nobody's ever asked me that question. It's usually something I'm teaching. I love that. So I always warn everybody, here's the path that it'll go on if you're really doing this work. And no, it's not visualization. And no, it's not affirmation. Those are Band-Aid type results for a permanent transformation that you want. Right. So like, it's not that they're bad. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a wound. Like you got to actually care for the whole thing. But from 0 to 21, just like think about anything you started that was new, right? You feel uncomfortable. You don't know what you're doing. You feel all that resistance that I was talking about. So you can think about it in terms of like working out or a new program or anything like that. And then in about 21 to 30 days, so I love that you saw that, I call this is the window of neutrality. So once every day that you get past 21, it's like you're going like this and then the compound interest kicks in. So 9 days after that 21 day, you're really starting to create momentum. And at that 30-day mark, I always tell people, this is how you'll feel. You'll have gone from, it's not working, I can't figure it out, to this beautiful place of neutrality. You'll be like, okay, you won't feel resistance anymore. But then you don't feel like you've hit the goal anymore, but it's not hard anymore. Now all of a sudden you're like, my clients are like, is this working? Like, I don't feel like that anymore. I'm like, yes, you're like right ready to just hockey stick it. And so every day with the reps that you do through things like brain priming and those kind of things that are in our community, you'll skyrocket from 30 to 67 day. Every day is like massive growth if you stick with it and you don't re-engage old patterns. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
that's good.
Wow.
Cool.
I always
I
reference
love
this
it.
one. I've heard you tell a story about how the power of the mind even to like affect physical realm, right? Like, I think you told a story about an athlete who did an exercise in their mind a certain amount of times. Can you tell that story for our listeners? It's one of those ones that stuck with me so much where it's
Mhm.
like, that is crazy to me. And whenever I tell people, they're like, no, that's crazy. You
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. And here's what I love about this story. I feel like entrepreneurs and athletes share a similar brain and drive, right? So there's something about, I love the research we did. We did a lot of other things like that, but this particular opportunity to be involved with, I wasn't leading that, but I was observing it. And I was like, this is what made me create all my hypothesis, which ultimately became our neuro coach model. So I'm sitting in this room and this is an Olympic level athlete. Now, if you're a swimmer, this will make sense to you. It didn't really make sense to me, but evidently there's more than one way to start a swimming stroke. And so this person was like 3/10, I believe, of a second off the top spot. And he was like really getting frustrated, and they've done all the training, all the things. So his coach was like, you know what, I want to do something different, and heard about the work that we were doing and decided to come work with us. So what we did is we scanned this athlete's brain, same like the pianists, right? Or the new people that were becoming pianists. And we could see he didn't have knowledge of this new stroke initiation that his coach wanted to implement. And we also knew that in order for that stroke initiation to happen, there would need to be a muscle growth in a small twitch muscle, right? Not one of our major ones, but in one of the small muscles. And we measured it. And I think that muscle, I mean, there was some muscle there. It was like 3 or 5%, but it's not a common needed muscle. So we embodied this idea. We started training this athlete's brain to create the stroke initiation. And his coach was doing the process because he's used to that voice. And so we trained the coach trained him in the lab. Like he never got in the pool, not once in those 67 days. I mean, that's not true. He got in the pool and did his regular stuff, but he never did anything with this stroke initiation. 67 days in, we did a scan of his brain, saw 100% learned knowledge, just like we did with the pianist. But yeah, like you were saying the story, like the thing that just blew my mind was we saw a 97% muscle growth in that small twitch muscle and never had actually used it. That's the power of the mind. I mean, it literally is a Ferrari waiting to take you to where you want to go. Like we are indoctrinated in our education system to stop believing ourselves, to stop trusting, to stop trusting our intuition. We have to raise our hands when we know we've got to go to the bathroom. That's called permission. Why do we think we need everybody's approval and permission? Because literally it was indoctrinated into us. Like if we were a family that we got A's and we were celebrated, great. And if we got a D or an F, it could have been hell on earth. Right. But what is that? That's somebody else telling us what our value is. And so our education system developed on an employee growing model. That's its purpose, right? It was put into action in the late 40s, early 50s to create great employees for our industrial age. Don't think for yourself. Don't trust your intuition. I mean, I'm sitting there going, I know I gotta go to the bathroom. Why do need to ask permission? Now, teachers are listening to this and they're going, oh, because it would be chaos. I get that. But what's happened is we stop trusting ourselves, stop trusting our intuition. And when you start to train your brain for an achievement, for something you want to accomplish, part of what comes back online for you is your intuition, your knowingness, knowing the right next step. We just got it trained out of us. Like, I don't know. I've got to ask somebody. I'm not sure. And as you start to train that part of your brain to believe where you're headed, so much so that it literally like a magnet brings it into your life, then you start to believe again that anything is possible. You start to believe again that you know what you're doing. You start to have confidence again in taking steps and being okay with failing because you know it's going to give you what you need. So just in this process, it's so powerful to know that we weren't left like, here, just go figure it out. Right. All the models that people still use are based on that industrial age era. The hard work and hustle. What is that based on? The more widgets you produce, the more you're going to rise up the chain of command, right? And so now we're in an information age, we're in an AI age. Information is moving at such a speed that literally yesterday it is obsolete. And instead of getting intimidated by that, the the ones that are going to win in this economy are the ones that have the vision and that they will train their thinking so that it actually sees it as safe and then unleashing your brain to allow it. And that's the powerful thing about this stuff. Like, I can't imagine. I look back when people are just getting started in our program and I see um, so many people feel like they're handcuffed from the thing that they want, you know? And really, it's just a matter of flipping that success switch on.
Yeah, that's so good. I think I really resonate. You just said about training your brain
Mhm.
to not be so afraid and intimidated by that feeling of fear that rises up or that discouragement, but that's actually an indicator of like to continue going. And I think for so much of my early days of entrepreneurship and even in like college and deciding to, jump in full forces with Steven in business, and at the time that was a wedding business, was like I let too much of that fear, like in wanting to feel safe and secure, I let that overpower a lot of my decisions. And I think I see that a lot in, people who want to join different programs or start the business or do something different, whether it's homeschool your kids or move, or, we let the familiar comfort override that other feeling that's actually supposed to propel us forward into more freedom. And I've really had to train my brain that when that comes up and I'm starting to feel a certain way, that's just like, this is an indicator that I am on the right path and that I can choose to see my future self and continue growing.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. You just brought something forward that I think your listeners really need to hear. Fear, it served us really well when we were in an era where, tigers existed and we were living off the land. Like fear was a really good thing, right? It kept us thriving, it kept us alive. This negativity bias that women, by the way, have 9 times more of than men. And we see 9 times more in the environment, right? And so we see the threat more. And what are our core needs? To be safe, to feel loved, and to feel like we're enough. And each of us have a different component of that that's the lead, right? So for men, it's more, am I enough? And then that's like the lead horse. And for women, it's more, am I safe? And then we both need to be loved in the middle. And so as we're thinking about that, fear now is the language of the patterns of the past. And so when we feel fear, we can feel resistance, which is different than fear. Resistance says, I feel uncomfortable. Fear says, pull the ripcord, get out, right? Something's going to go wrong. You're going to bankrupt your family, like all those things that go flying in your mind, right? But the language of the brain is certainty, never fear, which is really interesting on so many levels, the spiritual level and all the things. Like the language of the brain, when your brain believes it, it becomes done. Like it's just a matter of time. And that's how our brain was designed. So when you think on what is good and true and where you're headed, more than you think about the fear. And you need a process to do that. Otherwise, you're just trying. And, trying is still patterns on the past. But with the language fear comes up, we can say, wait a minute, that is aligned with the pattern of the past. Like I call them lies, right? If you keep the ones you want, but the other ones are just lies. They're just repetitions of somebody else's truth that became really a lie for you. And so what do we do with lies? We've got to get in there and get them out of there. And so I love that you're so real with your people about what you've been through, because like fear will take you out of the game faster than anything else. And as soon as that ripcord is pulled, your brain feels better because it's still aligning back past. And so I love that you were able to push through the uncomfort. And I always say there's the top 3% all accidentally train their brains. They don't know that they're doing it, but they're doing it. Have I told you guys the story about a common friend of ours, Bill Allen? I was speaking at his 8-figure real estate people's mastermind. And I got up and I shared, basically the tenets of our Sync Neuro Coach model and how to remove limitations and how to build a pathway and all these things. I was speaking for like an hour, and I knew Damon John was going to come speak, but I didn't know he was speaking after me. So Damon John, if he's Shark Tank, I don't know if you guys know who he is. I know you guys know who he is, but your listeners, he's the owner of Fubu, an amazing entrepreneur, and it really came out of rough scenario. And he walks up, Bill introduces him right after me, and he's looking at me, you guys, like a look, like I think I offended him. Like I'm like going through my head, what did I say? Like I'm doing all this thing, and he comes up to me and gives me a hug, and then he pulls back, and he like literally looks at me like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've totally offended like one of the coolest entrepreneurs. Like, what do I
Like,
do? And he gets up there and he looks at me and he goes, so I'm going to tell you my story, but she literally just told you everything I accidentally did to create what I have. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like, it was so cool that then he went on to tell, like, I had to make a decision and I started to train my thinking and he just went on from there. But, you know, accidentally doing it is possible, but it's so much better when you have the path and you don't have to struggle to get there. Right.
oh my
Yes.
goodness.
So good.
Wow. So powerful. Well, Shannon, this has been such an awesome conversation. Like, I want to keep going and keep digging into this. And I'm sure some of our listeners do as well. Like, where can they find you online if they want to go deeper on this topic? They want to just glean more from you. What's the best place to connect with you online?
Yeah. So website, drshannonirvine.com, or you can go over to Instagram by the same name. And we have a podcast called Epic Success that you will hear Chelsea and Steven on pretty soon. So I always give my best things there as well. So yeah, I would love to support them.
Awesome. We'll put show notes, links in the show notes. So thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Shannon, for being
Mhm.
on. This has been epic.
Anytime. Anytime. Thanks for having me. It was an honor.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Rainmaker Family Show. Hey, if you are not a part of our Rainmaker Mastermind, we have a new opportunity for you to book a one-on-one strategy call with one of our Rainmaker coaches.
If you want to get a call with them, see if it's a good fit for you to work with us to build a business that allows you to have time freedom and financial freedom, you can get that call at makeitrainmama.com/podcast. That's makeitrainmama, MOMMA.com/podcast.